The webinar will begin shortly. We're going to give it a few more minutes for the remaining attendees to sign in. If you can hear me, though, I would like for you to find the raise your hand button and go to webinar, and just click that button just to notify that you can hear me, so I can know that my audio is working. Thank you, and I'll be right back. Okay, we will go ahead and begin today's webinar. My name is Andy. I'm with Reservation Support. Just so you know, anybody that has possibly called in or has a mic, you are muted and will be muted for the duration of the webinar, so you're not able to talk over each other. However, if you do have any questions, I would love for you to ask them. To do that, you'll want to find the GoToWebinar questions box and type up your question and submit it there. You can do that during the webinar, or you can wait till after the webinar. I'm going to give everybody a break between the presentation and questions and answers portion so that they'll have time to submit their questions after the presentation. But if you want to submit them during the presentation, you can. After the webinar, I will activate everybody's reservation web account. And then shortly after that, I will send everybody an access email with login instructions. So be on the lookout for that email. If you don't get it, let us know. We'll make sure that you do. Today's agenda is the first part of the presentation. It takes about a half hour. Then we'll go into a question and answers session that can go up to 30 minutes, but normally doesn't. We will be discussing the key transition differences between Reservation GT and Reservation Web. Those differences being, or the topics we're going to highlight, are the help site, program navigation, the occupancy screen, making a reservation, bookings and guests, templates, reports, rates, and settings. We're also going to cover how to log into Reservation Web, and just before the Q&A session, we will talk about the final steps, next steps, and what you should know. So let's get started. First, I just want to talk about what browser that you might want to, or what browser you should use to access Reservation Web. If you're on a PC, Windows machine, then you're going to want to use Chrome, Firefox, or Microsoft Edge. Our suggestion is Chrome, but Firefox and Edge will work all right too. What you do want to avoid is using Internet Explorer. It's an outdated browser. It doesn't support HTML version 5, which is the language that reservation web was written in. So there's some oddities there, so you just want to avoid Internet Explorer. If you're on a Mac, Safari, Chrome, Firefox all work great. All right, we're going to move on to talking about the help site. Within your reservation web account, on every page in the upper right corner is a help button. You can click that button to go over to our help portal. One thing about that is if you click the help button and nothing happens, what you're experiencing is a pop-up blocker that's preventing the link from working properly. It opens in a new tab, but it does open like a pop-up, so pop-up blockers will hinder that from opening. If that's the case, you'll probably just need to go into your browser settings, disable the pop-up blocker to get to it. The pop-up blocker could also be in your antivirus software, so there's another place to look if the help button or feedback button next to it aren't working. They're being blocked by a pop-up blocker. But once you get into the help site, you'll see this page initially. There's a big button on the left for accessing help articles and a big button on the right for accessing training videos. There are more articles than videos, but we are working to rectify that by adding more videos. The site does contain a lot of knowledge to help you with the weeks following your transition. While we keep most of the processes the same between Reservation GT and Reservation Web, the web system is a new interface, so you may have some questions that can be answered in the help documentation. We do update it as features are released. So it's a good tool to lean on, and I would suggest taking a look at it, even if you don't have questions, because you might learn something that you didn't know. If you are in the help site and have trouble finding the answer to your question and you need further assistance, you're going to want to look towards the bottom of the page in the lower left corner. There will be two buttons to offer you further assistance. The email button will take you to a web form where you would submit your property information, your contact information, and your question or comment, and that will be created as a web case, and we will answer that in the order that we receive them and get to them as quickly as we can. But if you need more direct assistance, then I would highly suggest making a phone call to us. You can click the phone button at the bottom. That'll give you our phone number. All right, we're going to jump into the program itself here and talk about the navigation. This is what you'll find at the top of your reservation web account. And there are 8 tabs here instead of the drop-down menus like Reservation GT uses. Those tabs are occupancy, guests, bookings, gift certificates, reports, rates, templates, and settings. Above that menu, you'll find some additional information and links. First, you'll see the user account that you're signed in as, not the property, that's listed on the left, but the actual user that you're signed in as. There's the help button that we've already discussed, the feedback button, which takes you to our feedback portal, feedback forum. It's a place where you can submit functionality requests, improvement requests, suggestions, just things you'd like us to do differently. And we do monitor that frequently, so that's another good tool to take a look at. Then there's the sign out button, lastly, in the upper right corner. That'll help you, that'll take you out of your account, exit your account. Below that are a couple of universal buttons. The Quick Manager Access drop-down, which is the one that looks like a gauge or some sort of meter. And it will give you access to the Waiting List Manager and the Out of Service Manager. So if you need to manage your wait list reservations or out of service nights, that's where you want to go. The button beside it with the plus sign, that is the Quick Add drop-down, and that will allow you to quickly add a guest, a reservation, or retail sale. So overall, the navigation is pretty user-friendly, and that's why we've changed some things up a little bit. Moving on to the occupancy map. First, I want to discuss the navigation calendar bar at the top, this first area that we have highlighted. This gives you quick access to future and past dates within your database timeline and does show the entire database timeline. The longer you've been with reservation, the more years that are going to be within your database, so the longer that timeline will be. But as you scroll across the bar, you'll see a tooltip that will appear above your cursor that will show you what date that you're scrolling over. So you kind of want to move slowly when going over it so you don't jump past the date, but essentially you just want to find a date that's close to the area you want to go to and then click on it. You can use the arrows on the edges of this bar to kind of move a little slower, to scroll slower throughout the calendar below. To the left of it, though, are some additional options for selecting your date. First, there's this button you'll see with the 15 on it. If you click that, that opens a menu that will display a more traditional looking calendar. It displays 1 month at a time. You can scroll through the months, find the month you need, click on the day in that month, and it'll jump to that day on the calendar below. you're anywhere about on the calendar and need to get back to the current day quickly, just click the Today button. That'll jump you right back to the current day immediately. Moving to the right of the navigation buttons, there are a couple of buttons for controlling the height and width of the grid squares on the occupancy map. The options for height and width are small, medium, and large. The smaller you make these options, the more information you're going to see on the occupancy map. But because the boxes are becoming smaller, the content within them also becomes smaller. So it makes it easier to read if they're larger, but you see more information on the screen if they're smaller, so it's just a matter of preference. Then to the right of that are 5 toggle buttons that will turn on the display of various information on the occupancy screen somewhere. The first one is the $sign, and that will enable the display of the nightly room rate that would appear in the grid squares. The second button, when toggled on, will just turn on the display of minimum night stay settings within the room nights below. The third or middle button in that group of 5 is for the event strip. Events can be configured in the settings section, and you can define a date range, a name, and assign a caller to that special event. And then when the event strip is toggled on and you get to that time period, you'll see that colored, whatever associated color with it, that colored strip appearing below the dates of the event. So that's a good indicator for when you have those things coming up. The fourth button that looks like a funnel here, that will actually turn on the display of disabled rooms on the occupancy map. By default, your disabled rooms are hidden there, hidden from the map to just prevent it from getting clustered. But if you do ever need to see those rooms, just click the toggle of that button and you'll see them on the map. The last toggle is for the sticky note, which will display one single sticky note on the occupancy map only, and the intended purpose is just to display a short message so you can pass that message on to somebody that might be coming on staff or might be logging in next. Moving down and jumping across the screen, this drop-down menu here is for selecting your sort options for the rooms. You can choose to sort the rooms by room type, room name, or room abbreviation. Then on the right-hand side, we've got the Quick Actions menu highlighted. The Quick Actions menu is basically where you'll have access to all of the actions that you can take on the occupancy screen. So when you select a reservation, any action that's associated with that reservation will display in this area, such as check-in, check-out, creating documents, caller flagging, that kind of thing. So any of your actions are located in this right-hand Quick Actions menu. And when you click to select the date in the map, it'll automatically pop up, or when you click to select a reservation, it automatically pops up. But that is that's the occupancy map in a nutshell, but we do have a couple more slides on the occupancy map to touch on a few other things. So here what we have is the reservation detailed pop-up. When hovering your mouse over a reservation, a small detail screen will appear with basic reservation information. This allows you to see that information without having to fully open the reservation, so it's a time-saving feature. This also shows where the booking was made by a little icon in the upper right-hand corner of the detailed window. And you can see that small letter icon appearing on reservations that are not expanded on the map also. But in this screenshot, you'll see R for reservation, which indicates that the reservation was entered manually into the account. So somebody with access to the account, a user, has signed in and created that reservation manually. Some of the other indicators that you might see to indicate other paths that a reservation could have come from. You might see BE there for booking engine. If you are a reservation booking engine user, that will show BE there. If you happen to be using our channel partner, Sabre, for the purpose of selling your rooms on the global distribution system and online travel agent websites like Expedia or Hotels.com, when a reservation comes in from that path, you'll see GDS for global distribution system. You might see a BB there for BedandBreakfast.com if you happen to be a member of their online reservation program, and that's your reservation software. Lastly, in the off chance you might be a web reservations booking engine user, then when a reservation comes in from that path, you'll see W for web reservations. So this next screen is to talk about making selections on the occupancy map and more precisely clearing that selection. When you're going about your day-to-day business and working on the occupancy map, you'll find yourself clicking to select room nights, whether that's for the purpose of making a reservation or marking those nights out of service. You might get to a point where you need to clear a selection that you've made. If you're just trying to clear out a single day, just click the selection again and that'll clear it out. But one thing you can do, there's a couple ways to clear the entire selection that you've made. You can press the escape key on your keyboard and that will clear the selection. Within the quick actions menu, there's also a clear selection button. All right, we're going to move away from the occupancy map now and talk about making a reservation, and more specifically the Edit Rooms window. And we have the Reservation GT example on the left, we have the Reservation Web example on the right. And this process is very similar in both systems. The room assignment here on the web version is laid out vertically as opposed to the horizontal format of Reservation GT, but for the most part it functions identically. For example, we have in number 1 highlighted the Show All Rooms box. When you go to the Edit Rooms window of a reservation, you're only going to see the rooms that are specifically tied to that reservation. And the other rooms that aren't tied to it won't be listed. But if you want to see those rooms, maybe for adding a room to the reservation, you can check that box just like in GT to see all the other rooms. Secondly, we have the reservation lodging details. This does show each of the rooms that's tied to the reservation, and then below that a contact line so you can assign a guest directly to each of the rooms and a different guest to each room for the purpose of group reservations. Then below the contact assignment line is a line for assigning a package to that room. On the right-hand side of this window, we have an area where you can edit the number of adults and children in each room. Then in the center section are the room nights tied to the reservation. You can click to add or remove room nights here. Or if you just want to change the reservation entirely, changing dates or moving it, there are options on the right for doing that. At the top, the navigation and selection and toggle buttons are very similar to that of the occupancy map and other areas of the system, so we can maintain familiarity with how to navigate each page. Then on the far right side, we've got the reservation details, such as the nights booked. A really nice feature I like is the pricing on the right side. It's big and easy to see in bold font, unlike GT, where it was small and not easy to see and tucked into the corner of the screen. Then lastly, at the bottom is an area where you can adjust the rates for this specific reservation. You can still adjust rates by a fixed amount, a percentage. You can set all of the room nights to the same price, or you can do a manual override of each room night so that you can give each room night its own rate. So very much the same process as far as editing rooms in Reservation Web as it is GT. We'll move on to talking about the Bookings and Guests tabs. First off, we did rename the tabs. The reservation list is called Bookings, and the contact list is now called Guests. So any of those guest contacts you'll find on the Guest tab. Any sale, reservation, or retail sale would be found on the Bookings tab. Also, these pages do list the results in pages rather than long lists like GT did. You can show 25, 50, or 100 rows per page, and you can navigate the pages in the bottom left corner with the area that we have highlighted there. The single arrows jump a single page, and the arrow with the line after it before it jumped to the beginning or end of the record. At the top of each of those tabs, though, first in the upper left, you'll have the filter selection. When you go to these pages, by default, you'll either have all sales or all customers, so there won't really be a filter. But if you click there, you'll drop down a list. You'll have access to the predefined filters for each of those pages. If the predefined filters aren't working for you, you can create a custom filter, though. To do that, you just click the plus sign to the right of the filter dropdown. And then to the right of that are search boxes for searching for a specific record in guests or bookings. On the right side of the window, you'll see several buttons, options for taking various actions on either the bookings or guest screen, and they're a little different depending on which screen that you're on. But for example, there's printing and email options for documents. on the Guests tab, you can merge multiple guests into one record. Of course, you can delete records, but most importantly, you can export any of your results to CSV, comma-separated value. It's a file format that can be read by Microsoft Excel or similar spreadsheet programs. Okay, we're moving on to templates. And so far, much of what we've talked about, the processes are very similar to GT. However, templates, this is a pretty large departure from functionality-wise from Reservation GT, and a great improvement in my opinion. I'm saying this because in GT, most were relying on Microsoft Word to edit templates, which, if you're familiar with that process, is a little painful just because of how many steps that were involved in editing and customizing, well, creating, editing, customizing, and saving, and then re-uploading a document. But in Reservation Web, the template editor is built directly into the Templates tab. So it's like having a document writer built right into your system. So when you go to Templates, you will first have all of the templates, whether it's reports or letters, categorized on the left. You can just click to drill down into the categories and subcategories to find the document you're looking for. But the document will load, and at the top there is a toolbox that's set up with various tabs for accessing the type of features that you would expect of a document writer program like Word. So you can use those tools to manage your documents. Also in Reservation Web, just like in GT, we are still using template codes to pull values out of the database that are then plugged into the documents as you're producing them. And when you're editing a document, if you need to include a template code, to get to that list, you would go to the Insert tab of the toolbox, and then on the Insert tab, there's an All button. When clicked, it drops down a menu that will show all of the codes. Each template code is then also presented with a descriptor of the code to the right, and when you click the code, it will be dropped into your document at wherever your cursor position is. And just to kind of highlight how to create documents, essentially that process or flow works just like it does in GT. There is a standard version of every document that is, you can't edit, it's uneditable. It's logged for editing so that you always have that standard original version to go back to in case you do need to. But to create a new document, if you haven't created a custom document of any of these types, you would need to copy the standard in order to have an editable document. And to copy, you just select the letter that you want to copy and click the copy button. The system will prompt you to give it a new name, and then you can begin editing it. So that process is essentially like GT. But overall, editing documents, creating documents, it feels more user-friendly in Reservation Web than it ever did in GT, even with GT's built-in editor that was added on later last year. All right, we're moving on to the reports section. This is probably one of the more cut and dry areas of Reservation Web. It's laid out similar to the template section in that the categories of the reports are on the left, and you want to drill down into those categories to find the report you're looking for. But all of the same reports that you are familiar with in GT are accessible in Reservation Web, along with all of the same filters and sorting options for those reports. Building a report essentially works the same way. Once you've chosen your filter and sort options, select the date range, and click Create Report to generate that report directly within Reservation Web. If you do have custom reports, this drop-down box here is used for accessing any of your custom reports if you want to report on any of those instead of the standard one. But when it's produced, you'll see the report directly in Reservation Web. You can then edit the report. You can save the report, print it out, do whatever you need to there. You can even email it from this screen. All right. Moving on, we're going to talk about the rates area. And this is another section that's a departure from Reservation GT, in that we've centralized all of the rate-related functions reservation into one tab. Before, all of the rate features were on the program configuration screen of GT, which would be settings in Reservation Web. But now they've all been brought into one tab. So whether it's base rates or rate types or rate seasons and adjustments, If you're looking for any of those, you're going to want to go to the Rates tab. First, up in the upper left, you'll find the rate type selector. So if you have multiple rate types, you can select which one you want to view or edit by using this drop-down menu. Within this menu, you can also create new rate types. The navigation and toggle buttons, again, very similar to other areas of the system. On the left-hand side here, we have an area highlighted that shows you how to gain access to your base rates for each of those rooms. When you click this button for any of these rooms, it will open up the base rate screen where you can edit your base rates. As far as actually making changes, seasonal changes or on weekends, that process is very similar. You make a selection of nights that you want to edit, then you define a change for your selection. You can make a selection by just clicking the room nights to select them in the map here, but if you're editing a date range, anything bigger than like maybe a holiday or special event weekend, then it's going to become cumbersome to select all of those nights by simply clicking on them. So in that instance, I would suggest using the Advanced button in the selection area. When you click Advanced, you'll get this window that'll pop up, the one highlighted number 2 in our screenshot here. This window will allow you to define a date range. It will allow you to select what days of the week and what rooms or rental units you want to be included in your change. But when you click Select, just like if you had clicked all of the individual room nights, they will be highlighted blue on the map here to show you that they are selected. And that's kind of indicated in the key here at the bottom, which also explains what you're seeing with the R's and the S's on some of these nights are indicating a rate that's been modified different than the base rate, and an S indicating a minimum night stay that's been modified different than the base minimum stay. But you've got your selection, and now that you've made your selection, now it's time to use the Update Selected Values area to actually make a change to your selection. In the Update Type dropdown, you will be able to choose rates, minimum stay, or blackouts. So you can make changes to any of those 3 types through the Update Type selector. If you've selected rates, you can revert them to your base rate, you can set them to a specific rate, or you can adjust them by percentage or dollar amount. If you've selected minimum stay, you can revert them to your base minimum stay, or you can set them to a specific minimum stay value. If you've selected blackouts, you're simply either adding or removing a blackout, essentially taking the availability out or making it available for that specific rate type. But all in all, it is going to be fairly new making changes to rates in Reservation Web because it looks different than Reservation GT. But if you think about it, a lot of the process and flow is the same. It's just easier to get to because it's all in one tab. Okay, so now we're going to talk about logging into your Reservation Web account. This is a screenshot of our homepage, RezOvation.com. On our homepage, there's a link in the upper right, a login button that will take you to the login screen, which looks like this. And the address of this login screen is my.rezovation.com. And when you get to it the first time, you might just want to bookmark that address. It'll make it easier and to get quicker access to this page. To log into your account, you'll enter your account number, which is the same for all users in the account. And then you'll enter your username and that user's password. Then click Login, and it will sign you directly into your account. Here we have the settings screen. And the settings screen, you'll have access to the same options that you did in Reservation GT. The biggest difference we've already talked about, that rates aren't found within settings. Some of the settings have been broken out into smaller, easier to manage categories, such as the booking engine settings. What we have highlighted in the bottom left corner, the user accounts area, specifically want to talk about that because it's a little more important when it comes to Reservation Web than it was with GT, specifically user permissions. Within user accounts, of course, you can add users, delete users, change their username or password, but more importantly, you can manage their user permissions, what they have access to within Reservation. With Reservation GT, it was installed on a network at your location. In order to have access to Reservation, you would have to be at the location or have access to the network at the very least. So it allows you to monitor who was using reservation easier. Now, with Reservation Web, if you're giving them access to log in, they will be able to access Reservation Web, not only from your location, but from any computer with internet access. So one of the great advantages of a web-based system is also kind of one of its drawbacks if you're not careful about security. So when you log into your account the first time, I would suggest going to user accounts, maybe delete users if you don't need them, add users if you do need to create some, but look at the user accounts you have in there, take a look at the permissions, and just lock anybody out of areas that they just don't need access to. So this brings us to the end of the presentation portion of the webinar. We're going to talk about the final steps, the next steps, what you should be expecting. But first, I kind of want to go over one very frequently asked question and just kind of cover that before we get on with what's coming next. A lot of people will ask what of GT will be in their Reservation Web account when they log in for the first time. Will they have to create templates again? Will they have to build connections to third-party services or credit card processing? The good news is all of that is already moved over to Reservation Web. So the guests and reservations and payment records and correspondence records and your setup, configuration, rooms, rates, minimum stays, all of that, connection to third parties such as say BedandBreakfast.com, web reservations, others, credit card processing, that will all be set up in your new account when you get there. Keep in mind when you were with GT with us, you were all backing up your data to our portal in the event that you needed to download it again. So we already had that data. It's just a matter of activating your Reservation Web account, which I will be doing after the webinar concludes. Then I will be sending you all an email with your access information and login instructions. It does take me about an hour to get that whole process together, so give me a little time to put that together. As far as discontinuing use of Reservation GT or disconnecting GT, once you're comfortable with Reservation Web and you know that you just don't need GT anymore, you can uninstall it on your own. If you need help, you can call us. We'll assist you with the uninstallation of Reservation GT. But it's not entirely necessary that you do that because we do have a plan to automatically disconnect your GT software from our servers. The second Monday following your webinar date, we will be disabling that connection between your GT software and our servers. So for this group, it's November 27th. That's a Monday. And I will be coming in that morning. I will then run a tool that will just sever that connection between our servers and GT. The reason why that connection has to be broken is because over time, if you allow both Web and GT to be run concurrently, it raises the chance that database errors can occur, which isn't good for anybody. So we do give you a little bit of time in that safe window to make the transition, get everybody trained on Reservation Web, and just make yourself comfortable before we disconnect your GT service. And kind of along the lines of training, if you do need to view this webinar again, there will be a recording of it available to you, possibly for the purposes of allowing other people on staff to view it for training. Maybe you thought you missed something during some portion of the webinar, but you can view it again. To do that, you'll just use the access link that you used to access this very webinar and fill out a short registration, then you'll be able to then view and listen to the recording. Excuse me. That also does take a little bit of time to get together, so give me about an hour or so to put together the making that viewable or watchable, the recording of today's webinar. I do want to take this opportunity to harp on the help site one more time. It is a great resource, so please take a look at it. Go in there, even if you don't think you have any questions, and there might be something that you can learn there that you didn't even know you needed. So now we're going to take a short break, just for a few minutes to give you all time to submit questions, and I'm going to take a look at any questions that might have already been submitted. There's also some reminders here at the bottom of the page that you can read for your first time login. For the most part, things we've already covered, but some good information there as well. So I'm going to take a short break. Make sure you find the GoToWebinars question box and get your questions in there, and then I'll come back and read the questions aloud so everybody can hear the questions and answers. I'll be right back. All right, we do have questions rolling in here, so I'm going to begin answering these questions. The first question is, sort functions and reports do not suit our needs. Will this be us creating a new template? So maybe creating a custom template will meet your desired needs. It kind of depends on what your sort options are. That might be a good question to call in and talk to our techs about, so we can kind of do a one-on-one with you with creating a custom template. But you can, in creating a custom template, you can modify the code so that the data is printed on the page, essentially wherever you want it to be printed. So a lot of times we can work out something agreeable by building a custom template with you with the codes, the reporting codes. But that would be it'd be a good one-on-one call. So yeah, just give us a call about that, and we can talk about what your needs are for building a custom report. All right, moving on. The next question: does the information we enter in Reservation Web transfer to web reservations like it did with Reservation GT, pricing, minimum day stay? So to answer that question, the answer to the question is yes, it does work just like GT. Although, caveat to that, you've mentioned minimum night stay. That didn't transfer from GT to web reservations anyway, and so it doesn't transfer in Reservation Web to web reservations either. How that interface or integration does work, though, and it works the same for GT and Reservation Web. Also, it will already be configured when you get to Reservation Web. But when the process is begun, Reservation Web will contact web reservation servers, and it will request to download any new reservations that it hasn't downloaded, and it will then place those reservations in its own database. From there, Reservation Web will then send its availability and rate calendars to web reservations, which would override the availability and rates in web reservations. So those will function the same way. Minimum night stays do need to be configured in web reservations just like before, though. Next question. We've had problems with the history of our guests being moved to the web-based system. It sounds like you probably used it in the past. Excuse me. It sounds like you probably used it in the past, and the new version is, while it looks very similar as far as its interface, as how it's built is entirely different, though. The new version doesn't use Silverlight, which was the browser plugin that the old version ran on, and that's a thing of the past. So, in other words, I'm not expecting any issues with your guest history being moved over into Reservation Web. If you do find any problems, though, definitely let us know, and we will help you sort that out and help you get a resolution there. But in my experience, the guest data has been transferring without issue. Next question. Will the Reservation Web for iPad or iPhone ever have the occupancy grid? So there's a few things I could say on reservation on an iPad or iPhone. There is a reservation app that can be downloaded in the iTunes store. You'll need to look for iPhone apps, but there is a reservation app there. And up until actually today, since the release of iOS 11, the newest operating system from Apple on their mobile devices, our reservation app hadn't been working because when the iOS version 11 came out, our app wasn't compatible with its 64-bit structure. So we did update it, and we just released that update today. So if you're a user of the reservation iPhone app or using the iPhone app on an iPad and haven't been able to use it recently, you can now go back to using that. If you didn't know about it and want to start using it, just give us a call, and our support team will help you get set up with access to the app. It's free of charge if you're a reservation subscriber. And it's a pretty great app and does have an occupancy grid that you're talking about. There is a version of reservation, it's called Reservation Mobile, that does not have an occupancy grid like the iPhone app does. It does have a calendar, but it works a little differently, and some like it. Some don't like it as much and some like it better, so it just depends on who you are. But the Reservation Mobile is accessible not only from iPhones and iPads, but also from any other mobile device, so your Androids and Windows Phone, other other mobile devices. But it's not an app, actually. It's accessed directly through a browser, and you would sign into your account just like you would from a computer by going to our website and clicking login, or go directly to my.rezovation.com, enter your account information and log in. And the system will recognize that you're logging in from a mobile device and will boot you into the mobile version, which is a watered down version of RezOvation, but does contain like key features like being able to create documents and whatnot. So that is available, and kind of to that effect, you can trick a mobile device into logging into the full version of RezOvation. Now that we have the new system and it's built on HTML, it is accessible from a mobile device, unlike the previous Silverlight versions. You do have to tell your browser to fetch the desktop version of the login screen, which can be a little tricky if you're not that familiar with the settings of your browser on your phone, and it is different from platform to platform. So doing it on an iPhone is different than doing it on an Android phone, which would be different than doing it on, say, a Windows phone or another platform. But I know for specifically on iPhones, if you hold the refresh button, it's like an arrow with a circle around it, or a circular arrow, in the Safari browser, it will ask you if you want to fetch the desktop version of the page. And if you say yes, it will then allow you to actually log into the full version and not the mobile version. And you could do the same thing on other phones, but I believe it's a setting within the browser settings. I'm not sure where to locate that. But with a Google search or two, you should be able to find that. If you can't, you could call us. We should be able to help you locate that. So that's kind of mobile access in a nutshell. One last thing I wanted to add to that. If you are considering trying to fetch the desktop version of RezOvation on a phone with a smaller display, don't expect to have a great experience because it is a ton of data. There's a lot that shows up on the full version of the screen, especially the occupancy map. So it's not going to look great on a tiny screen, and I would suggest using the mobile version. But if you're on an iPad or other tablet with larger screen, you shouldn't have an issue with that. All right, so let's look on to the next question. Next question. In the past, the web-based model was very slow. Is it getting any faster? So the short answer to that question is yes. And the big reason for this, what was dragging us down before was the Silverlight plugin, the requirement to have the Silverlight plugin installed. It just didn't work well with modern browsers to start with, and then they stopped supporting it altogether, so you couldn't log in with modern browsers. We were stuck using Internet Explorer, which is inherently a slow browser in and of itself. So the answer is yeah, with the HTML version, it is much faster, and that's whether you're logging in or just creating reservations, just doing your day-to-day business. It's much quicker. To kind of put that into scale or perspective, when running the Silverlight version of RezOvation in the past, you were shooting for a connection that's going to get you probably at least 5 meg. You're going to need 5 megabytes per second down on your internet connection on that with the old Silverlight version, which is pretty standard for something like a DSL connection. But with the HTML version, it can be used on a slower connection. We've seen customers with slower satellite connections that were down to around 2 megabytes per second not have any issues with the new version. So yeah, it is faster and can be used on slower internet connections. Next question. When will we be able to start using the web-based software? And the short answer, and actually I see a never mind after that, but I'll just touch on it briefly. As soon as I'm done with the webinar, I'll activate your accounts and send you an access email. As soon as you get the email, you are good to log in and can begin using it immediately. Next question. I am concerned about security. We have very strict confidentiality requirements for our clients. Internet hasn't been known for security. So it's kind of a broad topic, but I would be more than happy to talk about it. When it comes to security and the internet, the more access you give to something, the more risks there are. And this kind of comes back to my talking about user permissions. And if you are really concerned about security, a few things that I would suggest. And some of them are just kind of basic security recommendations that aren't necessarily reservation related. And those kinds of things are like, if you're going to walk away from your computer, lock Windows, set up a Windows password for every user and just have them lock it when they walk away. That's a big one. Of course, antivirus suites, even if they're free, are a good idea. Malware removal tools to be ran occasionally on your computer, especially when it starts acting slow. That's all a good idea. I also suggest that you clear out cache, but more importantly, cookies in your browser on a a week or every 2 week basis. I would say is about how often I do it personally. But as far as reservation security is concerned, I would highly suggest creating a user account with for every user that's going to be logged in. So don't share user accounts. You can, but many users do. But I'd advise against it. And make sure everybody has their own unique password. Then manage their permissions so that they don't have access to areas that you don't want them to have access to. If you have somebody that needs access to reservation for some purpose but doesn't need to seek full credit card numbers, then you can lock them out from doing that. So really the permissions area is where you're going to find your best tools for enhancing your security for reservation. But a lot of it comes back to just general good practices with computers and being smart about what you do on the internet. Next question is a follow-up to that last question, and it says, I guess I am more concerned with outside sources obtaining access to guest information. So as far as the guest information goes, that guest information is stored on our secure servers, and it's stored on the same secure servers that you had previously been backing up to from Reservation GT. So any security, anything I could say to speak to the security of those servers would still, the same would be true for Reservation GT because that data isn't moving. So your data actually isn't going anywhere. It's staying on the same servers as it's been all this time as far as the backup of your data. It's just that you're going to be primarily accessing it from our servers as opposed to having a copy backed up or your main database on your local machine. And I can assure you that we have an IT team that is very dedicated to maintaining the security of our own networks and equipment. Even credit card numbers aren't stored directly on reservation servers. We have a super secure payment island server on our parent company where all credit card numbers are stored, and anybody that any of the software affiliates under HomeAway that have to call on credit card numbers are called on from that one super secure server, with only being the one connection that goes in or out of there is strictly for the purpose of passing those numbers along. So we are doing a lot to make sure that our servers are secure. That is my last question I've got to read here, but I'm going to give you all a couple more minutes to submit any additional questions that you have. Then if we don't have any further questions, I will go ahead and wrap up the webinar. I'll be right back. All right, we have a couple more questions that have come in. The first one, we have something set up but can't log in now. So your account hasn't been activated yet, but I will be activating it after the webinar is over. What I meant before is that because you were backing up your data from Reservation GT to our servers, that we already had your data on our end, so there isn't any need to migrate it from your machine to our servers. Everything's on our end also. It's replicated. So while the account does technically exist, until I activate it, you won't be able to access it. But that's what you'll be able to do after the webinar. And like I said, sometimes it takes me up to an hour to get all the activations and emails out. Next question. If we migrate from your product in the next year or two, would we be able to have a downloaded copy of our patient information? We would want to have record of our data if we were to go to an electronic healthcare record. So, okay, it sounds like that you're not exactly our typical lodging customer. So you, not that that really matters to the question, but does speak to as your reference to patients rather than guests, but they would apply the same here. You do have the ability to export your guest data or booking data from reservation, so that you can have that, and it's exported in CSV format, which is about the most common way to export that data. It's a format you'd be able to read in a spreadsheet program like Microsoft Excel. So yeah, you can get that data out of reservation. That is the last question we have now. I'm going to leave the line open for a few more minutes to see if we get anything else to come across. And then if we don't, we're going to wrap it up, and then we'll close everything out here. But I will return in the event that we have a question asked, or in a few minutes if we don't. All right, we didn't have any other questions submitted, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the webinar here. I do want to thank everybody for attending my webinar today and choosing to move to Reservation Web now. If you do have any questions for us after this webinar, you can submit a web case, or you can call us for more direct assistance, and we'll be more than happy to help you. But this is Andy from Reservation signing off, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks.